Chapter 12. 15 minutes later, Mr. Mount got his homeroom quiet and settled, which was not as difficult as usual. The boys were again subdued. There was a lot of gossip, but it was more of the whispered variety. Mr. Mount looked at them and then said gravely, "Men, Theo has an update on April's disappearance." Theo stood slowly and walked to the front of the class. One of his favorite trial lawyers in the town was a man named Jesse Melbank. When Mr. Melbank had a trial, Theo tried to watch as much as possible. In the summer before, there was a long trial in which Mr. Milbank sued a railroad company for the tragic death of a young woman, and Theo watched nonstop for 9 days. It was awesome. He loved about Mr. Milbank was that he carried himself in the courtroom. The way he carried himself in the courtroom. He moved gracefully but with a purpose, never in a hurry but never wasting time. When he was ready to speak, he looked at the witness or the judge or jury, and he paused dramatically before saying the first word. And when he spoke, his tone was friendly, conversational, seemingly off the cuff, but not a single word, phrase, or syllable was wasted. Everyone listened to Jesse Melbank, and he seldom lost a case. Often, when Theo was alone in his bedroom or office with the door locked, he liked to address the jury in some dramatic make-believe case, and he always imitated Mr. Milbank. He stood before the class, paused just a second, and when had everyone's attention, he said, "As we all know, the police found a dead body in the river yesterday. It was all over the news, and the reporters suggested that the body was April Fenimore." A dramatic pause as Theo searched through troubled eyes. "However, I have a reliable source that has confirmed that the body was not April. The body is that of a man about 5 feet 6 inches tall, and the poor guy has been in the water for a long time. His body was really decomposed." Grins everywhere on every face, even a clap or two, because he knew every lawyer, judge, court clerk, and practically every policeman in town. Theo's word carried great weight with his friends and classmates, at least in matters like this. When the topic was chemistry, music, movies, or the Civil War, he was not the expert and did not pretend to be. But when it came to the law, the courts, and the criminal justice system, Theo was the man. He continued, "At 9 this morning, the police will make this announcement to the press. It's certainly good news, but the fact is, April is still missing, and the police do not have many clues." "What about Jack Leeper?" Aaron asked. "He's still a suspect, but he's not cooperating." The boys were suddenly talkative. They asked Theo more random questions, none of which he could answer, and they chatted amongst themselves. When the bell rang, they scampered off the first period, and Mr. Mount hustled down to the principal's office to repeat the good news. It spread like wildfire through the office and teacher's lounge, and then it spilled into the hallways and classrooms, and even the restrooms and cafeteria. A few minutes before 9 a.m., Miss Gladwell, the principal, interrupted the classes with an announcement through the intercom. All 8th grade students were to report immediately to the auditorium for another unscheduled assembly. They had done the same thing the day before when Miss Gladwell tried to calm their fears. As the students filed into this auditorium, a large television was being rolled in by two of the custodians. Miss Gladwell hurried everyone to their seats, and when they were seated, she said, "Attention, please." She had an annoying way of dragging out the word "please" so that it would sound more like "please." This was often imitated over lunch or on the playground, especially by the boys. Behind her, the screen came to life with a muted broadcast of a morning talk show. She went on, "At 9 o'clock, the police are going to make an important announcement in the April Fenimore case, and I thought it would be great if we could if we could see it live and enjoy this moment together. Please, no question. She glanced at her watch and then glanced at the television. Let's put it on channel 28, she said to the custodians. Schattenberg had 2 network stations and 2 cable. Channel 28 was arguably the most reliable, which meant that it generally made fewer blunders than the other. Theo had once watched a great trial in which Channel 28 was sued by a doctor who claimed the reporter for the station had said false things about him. The jury believed the doctor, as it did Theo, and gave him a bunch of money. Channel 28 was showing another morning talk show, one that had started an hour not with the news, but with with the latest breathtaking details of a celebrity divorce. Thankfully, it was still on mute. The 8th graders waited patiently and quietly. There was a clock on the wall, and when the minute hand made it to 5 minutes past 9, Theo began to squirm. Some of the students began to whisper. The celebrity divorce gave way to a bridal makeover, in which a rather plain and somewhat chubby bride got worked on by all manner of flaky professionals. The trainers tried to whip her into shape by screaming at her. A man with painted fingernails restyled her hair. A real weirdo plastered on new makeup. This went on and on with virtually no improvement. By 9:15, the bride was ready for the wedding. She looked like a different person, and it was obvious, even with no sound, that her groom preferred the version he had originally proposed to. But by then, Theo was too nervous to care. Mr. Mount eased over him and whispered, "Theo, are you sure police will make the announcement?" Theo nodded confidently and said, "Yes, sir." All confidence had vanished. Theo was kicking himself for being such a loudmouth and know-it-all. He was also kicking Ike. He was tempted to sneak his cell phone out of his pocket and text Ike to see what was going on. What were the police doing? The school, though, had a strict policy regarding cell phones. Only 7th and 8th graders could have them on campus, and calls, texts, and emails were permitted only during lunch and recess. If you got caught using your phone at any other time, then you lost your phone. About half of the 8th graders had cell phones. Many parents still refused to allow them. "Hey Theo, what's the deal?" Aaron Hellberg asked at full volume. He was seated behind Theo, 3 seats down. Theo smiled, shrugged, and said, "These things never run on time." Once the chubby bride got married, it was time for the morning news. Floods in India were claiming thousands of lives, and London got hit with a freak snowstorm. With the news out of the way, one of the hosts began an exclusive interview with a supermodel. Theo felt as though every teacher and every student was staring at him. He was anxious and breathing rapidly, and then he had an even worse thought. What if Ike was wrong? What if Ike had believed some bad information and the police were not so sure about the dead body? Wouldn't Theo look like an idiot? Indeed he would, but that would be nothing if the police had, in fact, pulled April out of the water. He jumped to his feet and walked over to where Mr. Mount was standing with 2 other teachers. "I've got an idea," he said, still managing to appear confident. "Why don't you call the police department and see what's going on?" Theo said. Who would I call?" Mr. Mount asked. "I'll give you the number." Miss Gladwell was walking over, frowning at Theo. "Why don't you call Theo?" Mr. Mount said, and that was exactly what Theo wanted to hear. He looked at Miss Gladwell and said, very politely, "May I step into the hall and call the police department?" Miss Gladwell was pretty nervous about the situation, too, and she quickly said, "Yes, and hurry." Theo disappeared. In the hall, he whipped out his cell phone and called Ike. No answer. He called the police department, but the line was busy. He called outside the office and asked if she had heard anything. She had not. He tried Ike again. No answer. He tried to think of someone else to call at that awful moment, but no one came to mind. He checked the time on his cell phone. 9:27. Theo stared at the large metal door that led into the auditorium where about 175 of his classmates and a dozen or so teachers were waiting on some very good news about April. News that Theo had brought to school and delivered so dramatically as possible. He knew he should open the door and return to his seat. He thought about leaving, just going someplace in the school and hiding for an hour or so. He could claim that his stomach was upset, or that his asthma had flared up. He could hide in the hallway. He could hide in the library or in the gym. The doorknob clicked, and Theo stuck the phone in his ear, as if in deep conversation. Mr. Mount came up, looked at him quizzically, and mouthed the words, "Is everything okay?" Theo smiled and nodded his head as if he had the police on the line and they were doing exactly what he wanted them to do. Mr. Mount returned to the auditorium. Theo could 1. Run and hide, 2. Stop the damage with a little fib, something like the announcement by the police had been postponed, or 3. Stick with the current plan and pray for a miracle. He thought about throwing rocks at Ike, then gritted his teeth and pulled open the door. Everyone watched him as he returned. Miss Gladwell pounced on him. "What's going on, Theo?" she asked, eyebrows arched, eyes flashing. "It should be any minute now," he said. "Who did you talk to?" Mr. Mount asked, a rather direct question. "They're having some technical problems," Theo replied, dodging. "Just a few more minutes." Mr. Mount frowned as if he found this hard to believe. Theo quickly got to his seat and tried to become invisible. He focused on the television screen where a dog was gripping 2 paintbrushes with his teeth and splashing paint on a white canvas while the host howled with laughter. "Come on, Theo said to himself. "Someone saved me here. It was 9:35. "Hey, Theo, any more inside scoop?" Aaron said loudly, and several kids laughed. "At least we're not in class," Theo shot back. 10 more minutes passed. The painting dog gave way to an obese chef who built a pyramid out of mushrooms, and almost cried when it tumbled down. Miss Gladwell walked in front of the television, shot a vicious look at Theo, and said, "Well, you need to get back to class." At that moment, Channel 28 cut in with a breaking news graphic. A custodian hit the mute switch, and Miss Gladwell hurried out of the way. Theo exhaled and thanked God for miracles. The police chief was behind the podium, with a row of uniformed officers behind him. To the far right was Detective Slater in a coat and tie. Everyone looked exhausted. The chief read from a page of notes that he gave the same information Ike had delivered to Theo about 2 hours earlier. They were waiting on DNA testing to confirm things, but they were still almost certain that the body pulled from the river was not that of April Fenimore. He went to some detail about the size and condition of the body, which they were working hard to identify, and he gave the impression they were making progress. As for April, they were following many leads. The reporters asked a lot of questions, and the chief did a lot of talking, but not much else was said. When the press conference was over, the 8th graders were relieved, but still worried. The police had no idea where April was, or who took her. Jack Leeper was still the prime suspect. At least he wasn't dead. Or if he was, they didn't know it yet. They didn't yet know of it. As they left the auditorium and left to class, Theo reminded himself to be more cautious next time. He had just barely avoided being the biggest laughingstock in school. During the lunch break, Theo, Woody, Chase, Aaron, and a few others ate sandwiches and talked about resuming their search after school. The weather, though, was threatening, and heavy rain was predicted for the afternoon and into the night. As the days had dragged by, there were fewer and fewer among them who believed April was still in Strattonburg. Why, then, should they search the streets each afternoon if no one believed she would be found? Theo was determined to continue, rain or not. That's the end of chapter 12.